Imagine your wife pours her heart out to you, tells you about her childhood, her mother, her dreams, and you just stare at her like a brick wall. That's exactly what Metro Exodus asks you to believe. And that's the greatest representation of the biggest problem with silent protagonists. They completely fall apart once you put them in a social environment. You see, response is a human nature. When somebody asks you, you answer. When somebody talks to you, you respond. But Artyom, the main character of Metro Exodus and the whole Metro series, doesn't. And that's precisely why he doesn't feel like just a quiet guy. He feels like someone who shouldn't exist. Another thing closely related to dialogue and talking is that it makes it very hard to show emotion. Artyom is framed in the story of Metro 2033 as an inexperienced, terrified, kinda pussy soldier sent on a mission he wasn't ready for. But because he's silent, we hardly ever see him that way, outside of loading screens when he actually talks. That's why it messes with his image. He doesn't seem terrified. He doesn't scream when a mutant jumps on top of him. He doesn't cuss when he's discovered by the communists, but instead charges into them with a rifle made out of shit and superglue. He's just silent in all of these situations where he should not be when we take his traits and experience into account. Also, they made Artyom speak in the loading screens. So why not in the actual game? This is something I never understood about the series. I get that you can still show emotion through hand movement and such. Actually, oftentimes it is preferred and better, but being able to show it through dialogue is also a useful option. But it is limited with a silent protagonist. Not only that, silent protagonists often go down as personalityless and terminators. But this is more of an issue with the writer's inability to create choice without dialogue. There are two representations of why a silent protagonist can and cannot work in Metro Exodus in the terms of choice and decision. First is when Artyom risks his life just to have a chance at saving his wife, looking for a cure in a hostile environment full of mutants and radiation. This shows he is not personalityless completely, but deeply cares about his wife, and chooses to go and try and save her even when it could potentially kill him. The second example of when a silent protagonist can't work is in the Volga chapter, the second one. Miller, the leader, doesn't want to take a family on the train. A friend asks Artyom to convince Miller to take the mother and daughter. Artyom goes inside, sits for 20 seconds listening to Miller rambling, and then his friend comes in and convinces Miller himself. This situation show how a protagonist being silent handicaps their abilities at persuasion, indoctrination, and convincing, which is also pretty important. Something you should already see is that most of these problems originate from the character's socializing, not the character being silent themselves. Artyom is shit in Metro Exodus because he's constantly in a group, and while they chant, he sits there silently, like he's antisocial or something. His wife talks to him and he just sits there. Isn't it interesting how he only becomes decent in the last chapter, where after he gets split up with Miller, he's mostly alone with no radio connection or anything? And his dedication to saving Anna, his wife, also gets shown. So something you can deduct is that in order for a silent protagonist to work decently, they need to be mostly alone in the story. Because being around other people would realistically push them into even simple conversations and small talks. The biggest problem with them is that they are unrealistic when in social spaces, but them being rather silent in an apocalyptic wasteland, standing there alone under a frozen car, is much more believable, even realistic. I feel like a question worth answering is why are protagonists even silent in the first place? Especially when a core part of most stories is the relationship between characters in the same group. The biggest argument I've seen online is that it makes them relatable and it makes it seem like the player is inside the game world. But I think speech alone doesn't decide whether a story is immersive and relatable or not. These things come more from the ability for the player to decide and change the storyline with a classic choice selection option. This is exactly why games like Project Zomboid are so immersive. Not because your fictional wife is yapping to you while you sit there emotionless, but because you have full control over how your story goes. At the end of the day, I don't see really much of a reason to make your protagonist silent in most cases. Having your protagonist be silent messes up with dialogue possibilities. That's exactly why they only work in very specific environments, and stories built around isolation, player expression, or minimal social interaction. Metro Exodus does the exact opposite, and that's why Artyom seems so out of place, so unrealistic. Like an ice cube in the middle of the goddamn Sahara Desert. It strips them of atmospheric shit like coughing, silently swearing when something goes slightly wrong, or loud slurs when they are being attacked by stinky ghouls. I am really happy 4A Games decided to make the main protagonist of the new Metro 2039, the Stranger, actually talk. It really opens up new opportunities without the silent emo argument that makes his wife seem like she's talking to a brick wall. Once again, thank you for watching this video. Until next time. See ya!